suggestion that he is going to be patient. He's going to be patient and kind and gentle from now on. The only reason he is asking for this help or wants this suggestion is because he has been unkind and unreasonable over a very long period of time. He has had a nasty disposition since the beginning of his own memories of himself. Now he wants to really reform. Perhaps the reform has been thrust upon him by the misery of circumstances. He can't get along with himself anymore, and no one else can get along with him. This is affecting his pocketbook, and that is a real disaster. So what is he asking? He is asking that a therapist of some kind shall give him a formula, bring him into the office, give him a little psychological brushing every couple of days, send him on his way with new conviction that he can be master of his own destiny and he can be a lovable, noble person if he so desires. And keeps on repeating to himself that he not only can be, but that he is. This individual probably doesn't believe it himself. He knows himself too well. So his suggestion falls upon sterile ground. Furthermore, he spends 5 minutes every morning and 5 minutes every evening making this noble, platitudinous remark about himself to himself. And the rest of the day is as cussed as ever. The timing factor here is a little difficult. Nature operates more or less honorably. If you want to take $1 out of the bank, you must put $1 in. If you want to change a habit from a bad habit to a good habit, you can practice the bad habit most of the time, and the good habit a small part of the time, and expect the good to neutralize the bad. You cannot repeat 50 times in rapid succession that you are getting better and better, and for the rest of your waking hours continue to get worse and worse. The suggestion is not as strong as the habit, is the point that we're trying to subtly convey. Actually, the only way that you can win a battle of this kind is to have the two armies of approximately equal strength. That may end in a draw. But you cannot overcome the habits of a lifetime or the intensities of the daily repetitions of these habits now by a few well-curled or turned phrases. You may gain a certain result, but it cannot achieve too much because there is too much negative static involved in the situation. As soon as autosuggestion, or even suggestion itself for that matter, because it is often so used, became a wee bit popular, and individuals believed that they had gotten hold of the great and divine magical mystery of the universe, they also attempted to use this suggestion concept in a variety of ways for which it was never intended. The individual began to believe that he could mentalize himself, not only out of misery into health, but out of poverty into prosperity. He began to honestly believe, with such degree of honesty as he could believe, that he had found a magic wand which could transform everything and anything by a fixed attitude of the mind and the repetition of a formula. This led to innumerable complications. It also led largely to the general discrediting of a large part of the field of suggestion and auto-suggestion. It meant that we were in the presence of an excess, more or less a corruption of an idea. And that which was intended to change man was directed to changing other things instead of man. The individual began to take the attitude that if he was not getting along well in the world, that his suggestion could go so far as to make the world change and treat him better. It's a lot of suggestions. In fact, as far as changing the world, even the divine suggestion seems to operate slowly. Also, we gained a certain telepathic attitude towards suggestion and auto-suggestion. We believed that we could sit around and by holding various thoughts cause our neighbors to move out or our distant friends to move in. We began to think of suggesting real estate transactions, good investments, and in many instances I've actually known people to suggest that other people should be stupid, simply so that we could impose upon them more easily. This, of course, was a little nightmare world of its own, more difficult and inconsistent and fantastic than Prospero's enchanted isle. The most that we did, of course, was to keep on suggesting to ourselves that we could achieve the impossible. Sometimes it looked as though we made it. But we began to ignore utterly the laws of probability. We forgot, for example, that in sickness, unless diagnosis has proof that we have a very serious ailment, miscellaneous, wandering, itinerant symptoms, griefs, misfortunes, and miseries of 1,000 assorted nature, will, in about 20 cases out of 25, simply solve themselves. Nature, stepping in, will cure most of the minor ailments that arise in man. It gives them a chance. But if we have some kind of a magic formula, we forget the natural operations of nature and give credit to the formula for things the formula had nothing to do with. Furthermore, by this process, we gain greater and greater confidence in the formula. Someday we trust our weight too heavily upon it, and this bridge of believing collapses under it. Auto-suggestion then leads to a whole series of rather sobering reflections. That it can produce certain results, we do not doubt. Auto-suggestion means that we suggest something to ourselves. Why do we use this technique? Usually because of some weakness in character, which makes it difficult for us to head into a proper, normal, reasonable correction of our own troubles. The individual says, well, I drink a little too much. I've tried 15 times to quit. Now I'd like a nice working formula of auto-suggestion so that while I sleep, I will get over the habit. There's no implication that this individual wants to work his way through the habit. He really is out looking for one of these psychological painkillers or these universal remedies like the old Swanee Indian swamp syrup, which was supposed to take care of everything, including all unreasonable indulgence. This individual is trying to use suggestion or auto-suggestion to take the place of the weakness of his own will. Well, he is up against a number of possibilities. If he decides on the auto-suggestive process, he will almost certainly turn his suggestion against the habit he wishes to cure. He does not know, will not accept, nor believe, or realize that the habit is only an expression of himself. That he will never get over the habit adequately until he becomes a better person. That's the one thing he doesn't want to do, because that recommends or suggests hard work. The only way we can get out of weakness, negativity, or inadequacy is to outgrow these things. So what we really need is growth. We need to become the kinds of persons who will not make the silly mistakes we are now trying to get out of by autosuggestion. It is true that we can, by suggestion means, anesthetize an arm so that you will not feel any pain in it while surgery is performed. We can, for 48 hours or 72 hours, block the alcoholic desire. If you want to come to an approved therapist often enough, you can block it for several months. But this is not recovery, any more than an aspirin cures some kind of a pain in the body. You can take certain painkillers and temporarily get relief from a toothache. But the only solution is finally to either have the cavity filled or the tooth pulled. In suggestion, we have an emergency instrument that can be and often is exceedingly useful. But it is never a solution nor a substitute for the correction of the situation itself. The only point where there is an exception to this rule is where the area of suggestion is exactly in the area of the problem. For instance, it is easier to help by suggestion a person who is involved in some complex or other situation for which the suggestion is the sole and total remedy. If, for example, you can take a person who is fearful or who has, for example, claustrophobia. You take this person and you give him a powerful suggestion, or you help him to formulate an auto-suggestion that he can enter into a room, a small, dark room, and close the door and not be afraid. You probably can give him sufficient self-confidence, or by the magic of auto-suggestion, he can imagine himself into having a degree of confidence that he always possessed and didn't know it. He goes in, closes the door. After a little while, he comes out radiant. The problem is solved. And the chances are, as far as he is concerned, the problem is solved. He now knows that he can go into that room. He has done it. That was all the remedy that was required, was to experience that the room was not terrible or terrifying. Once having gained that experience, the matter is closed. Except what caused the claustrophobia. You've gotten rid of the symptoms. 6 months later, this individual may develop some other symptoms. He may suddenly become a rank, uncontrolled worrier. He might develop a temporary or even growing loss of hearing. He may become accident-prone and start falling over his own shadow. He may suddenly become extremely suspicious of his friends. He doesn't have claustrophobia anymore. But we've only treated an effect. The cause still remains. Suggestion and auto-suggestion will not, in most instances, adequately treat causes. Unless the cause is extremely shallow and recent or comparatively unimportant, we cannot be sure that we can reach it in a permanent way. But now let us suppose that suggestion or auto-suggestion is indicated in this case. We then come to another problem which has some meaning, and that is the use of mechanical devices to make auto-suggestion more effective by increasing the frequency of it. Assuming, of course, as we said concerning suggestion, that something has to be done to balance off, because 5 minutes of right suggestion will not compensate for 23 hours and 55 minutes of bad attitude. So now comes a discovery which I think more or less was influenced by the war. We found it rather important to suddenly train men in language. We needed very quickly a number of linguists, and if there's one department of American education that is weak, it is the languages. We live in such a large country that we do not need languages, as many foreign countries do. All we need is a solid vocabulary and a reasonable amount of slang. We can then become mutually understood. But suddenly we found that we needed several thousand persons who could speak Japanese, or Korean, or Russian, or perhaps Finnish, or the language of the Laplanders. We didn't have any such people. And the few that might have had such knowledge might not be in an age bracket suitable for military use. So to train men in language, we hit upon the device of using recordings. Recordings not merely as to be studied in the normal way of a half hour of listening, but recordings to be played almost continuously. Recordings in which pronunciation, the form of the words, the sequences, the enunciation, the emphases, and so forth of a language, the meanings of these words, the grammar, and every factor of it was continuously and repeatedly conveyed to us, day and night. As a result of this type of instruction, men learned languages with considerable fluency in 6 months, far more than they could have learned in any other way. This led to the inevitable belief that during periods of other occupation, or even during periods of sleep, suggestion can be continuously poured in upon us for the purpose of creating a more or less complete compensation for the counteractions of our own personalities and temperaments. This worked out in a number of instances rather well, temporarily. But it did not work over a long period of time. Actually, this suggestion, moving in upon the person, did not have the validity in his own experience. He was asked to accept suggestions that could be used in the case of language because all it had to do was reach his memory and the retentive areas. And the suggestion can be held in that way. But there's a great deal of difference between remembering and being moved. We all remember the words of Jesus, but we don't live them. It is perfectly possible to have in our memory all kinds of constructive insight and understanding. But to move this from memory into action, or to change it from merely being on file and get it into use, this is different and not nearly so easy to accomplish. Thus, a noble suggestion or auto-suggestion brought into our attention may temporarily cause us to obey it, as we would under hypnosis. But we cannot be at all overly confident that this suggestion will become a dynamic, changing the individual factually and actually. In defense of what I am saying, I would like to mention that I have known personally a great number of individuals who have taken long and difficult courses in autosuggestion. They have worked with it. They have tried every known means. They have used mechanical devices to repeat the suggestion day or night. The suggestion itself was in many instances luminous, transcendent, magnificent. But after several years of it, the individuals who practiced it are not luminous, nor are they transcendent. They have gained perhaps certain mechanical help. They may have been able to get over a bad spot, but I have not been able to convince myself that an individual with a nasty temper could subject themselves to any type of autosuggestion for 5 years and come out with an angelic disposition. I have not seen it. I would love to see it. I don't care how they got the disposition, I just love to see the disposition. But it just does not seem to happen. But this I will say, these people come out of it believing that they have an angelic disposition. But it's not quite the same thing. We get pointers on that from their friends and relatives. We know people who have convinced themselves that through these processes they have strengthened intuition, become practically mystics. Actually, they have trodden upon the threshold of illumination. But when you try to work with them or live with them, they're the same old people you knew before. They believe, but they have converted the mind only. They have not actually altered the life processes. Now, autosuggestion, in order to alter life processes, has got to accomplish the same thing that we referred to before in connection with suggestion. Man has very little confidence in himself. He just knows himself too well. He has very little confidence in his own insight, his own wisdom, and less in his own strength. Unless he is an egotist, when he will not even seek self-improvement, he is weak. So he will create a suggestion, and he will repeat it. But even as he repeats it, he will not believe it. He may hope, but he remains in a state of peculiar breathless expectancy. The only way that he could finally convert himself is by a miracle. If he held some suggestion or autosuggestion for a few hours, and a miraculous event occurs, he might then have greater courage. He might go on more industriously. But this is not the common pattern of things. And the miraculous events, if they do occur, are usually shown to be fortuitous circumstances. So we can't depend upon this. So the only problem that can help the individual who is all alone with his own suggestions is again magic. Mystery. Actually, primitive man is all alone with his own suggestions. He gained a mysterious power to be greater than himself, or to outgrow his own limitations, or to transcend his own frailties, by use of devices, of which the most common to descend to our remembrance is the fetish, or the talisman, or the amulet. Even today, persons in hazardous professions make use of these devices as a source of self-confidence. Now, what is the reason why a rabbit's foot is any different than a good text on autosuggestion by a prominent psychologist? The text cannot be accepted uncritically. We read it, we wonder a little, we think a little, but we're not very certain. And even if we're rather certain, we say, yes, it's probably true, but I doubt if I can do it. I've never done anything right yet, and it doesn't look as though this is the time when I'm going to start. So the situation drifts at least half-heartedly. But a rabbit's foot is different. In the first place, it makes no sense, except when it's on the foot of a rabbit. We're not even quite sure how it came to be a fetish at all, unless perhaps it was because the rabbit was anciently associated with the moon, and a whole string of myths and legends tie it together. Now, when I'm saying a rabbit's foot, I mean almost any kind of talisman. It may be a piece of metal inscribed with the 72 names of God. It may be a Muslim charm upon which is traced in beautiful writing the name of Allah and His faith. It may be a prayer, it may be anything. It may be one of those wonderful little devices that look more than anything else like a child's drawing. It is worn by the pearl fishers of the Philippine Islands when they go down under the sea in search of pearls. It is something that has a magic power. Now, this magic power rises from an atavistic level of our own subconscious. We do not believe in ourselves. We do not believe in our neighbors. We may doubt our clergyman. We gravely suspect our doctor. And we are much disillusioned in our psychologist. But a rabbit's foot is different. A rabbit's foot is mystery. Perhaps it'll work. It's just like the individual who is not superstitious but never walks under a ladder. He's just careful. The moment you think about this, you realize that the rabbit's foot to the average person is a kind of demoralizing factor. It takes away most of the common senses. Therefore, when the time comes for us to make an affirmation, or to try to suggest ourselves into something, or to achieve an auto-suggestive intensity, it might be different if we make this statement, if we say these words, if we hold this thought with all our strength, at the same time take a tight hold on a rabbit's foot. The Chinese say that if one religion is good, two are better. So there is no use missing a good opportunity. In the same way, when we say in our prayer to ourselves, God, give me an understanding heart, we have a different attitude, because we are asking something of a force that is abstract, mysterious, which we believe can be so. And if magically we say, I am normally a coward, but while I hold in my hand this golden charm upon which is written the name of my God, as long as I hold on to that, I am strong. The individual is suddenly courageous. There are thousands of cases of it, critically recorded. But this kind of autosuggestion is strong. And it is strong because it applies to the inner part of our consciousness. And that it also does not depend upon our strength to overcome our own weakness. We do not believe that we are strong enough. We cannot conceive intellectually that we can take hold of our own bootstraps and lift ourselves off the ground. But if something else, some mysterious symbol of power, moves with us, then God and one constitutes the majority. If we can use something which stimulates our faith, makes us feel that this victory is not our own, but the victory of a power greater than ourselves, which we have known how to call upon. And the help of this power is an ever-present help in times of trouble. Then we are no longer depending on our own suggestions. We have stated in our own consciousness what we hope for, what we desire to have happen, what perhaps we feel desperately that we need. But it is not the voice of man crying in the wilderness. It is the fulfillment of a promise that if we will do certain things, take certain attitudes, supply ourselves with certain magical implements, then suddenly we are strong. We have the power through these other means of accomplishing what we cannot accomplish alone. This shifts our source of strength to an abstraction which cannot be unseated, which cannot be overthrown by event or condition. This abstraction gives us the courage. It is again and again this which comes back to us in the prayer formulas. Prayer is suggestion, autosuggestion in many instances, given strength by devotion. Prayer is therefore the individual opening himself uncritically to universal good. He could try to argue himself into it, but he cannot win, because he does not believe his own argument. But if he follows the ancient way of his faith, certain in his own heart that the God of his fathers will not forsake him, he is no longer merely making a suggestion. He is affirming a conviction. And out of this total affirmation of his nature, he is able to achieve a result against the preponderance of negative factors. The individual who speaks with the fullness of his own conviction supported by his concept of the presence of a divine available, can in 5 minutes a day counteract the 23 hours and 55 minutes. Because those 23 hours and 55 minutes do not represent one coordinated conviction of weakness. They represent largely confusion. They do not represent a focused intensity of evil, nor do they represent one simple pattern of infirmity. They represent a group of negative factors, habitually perpetuated, but about which we have the deepest moral reservations. The average person who is wrong knows it, particularly on the levels of ethics, or on the level of internal motivation, or on the basis of principle. He is wrong, he knows it, but he is too weak to do anything else. So the negation of the confusion of the mind will cause him to say, this I cannot do. This I cannot face. This is too much for me. I'm going down for the 3rd time. But this does not constitute an organized, powerful, psychically sustained fact of consciousness. It represents dilemma, distress, disaster, but not a certitude of evil or a certainty of misery. If, therefore, you turn against it a powerful, unified conviction, not an attitude or a plan, but a need sustained by the recognition of the factor of divine intercession, the miracle, the fetish, the rabbit's foot. This is stronger than the negative confusion which permits the difficulty to continue. For this reason, a tremendous religious experience, as Havelock Ellis points out, can in a fraction of a second completely change a whole life. So we have, against the extensity of a pressure, the intensity of a compensating pressure. In nature, these two values must be equal to produce the neutralizing of a condition. If a situation takes 10 years to get into, it does not necessarily take 10 years to get out of. But you must use as much energy to get out as you use to get in. If, however, you concentrate your energy on the problem of recovery, you can create a tremendous catharsis very rapidly, in which you achieve the full emotional energy equivalent of a long enduring negative habit. You achieve it and neutralize this habit far more rapidly than you acquired it. Not because you have found an easy way out, but because you have found a more efficient way to solve the problem. Efficiency in this case being merely directness, the victory of a consciousness or a principle over a condition. If then in either suggestion or auto-suggestion we use merely formulas, or we try to hold attitudes that are strange to us, even though we want them, it is my opinion that our labors will be, for the most part, fruitless, except in the same way and to the same degree that we might seek temporary remedy in an extremity by the use of some drug which will not cure, but may make better treatment possible under more fortunate circumstances. If, however, by suggestion and autosuggestion, we mean the intensification of value by which we are capable of basically changing our own relationship with life, this means that we must have available an emotional quotient. We must not affirm or suggest. We must experience. We must know the fact of this upon our own skin. We must live through the condition and know that it is so. And to achieve this greater insight, this greater degree of insight, we must move the internal part of our lives. We cannot keep on tossing these suggestions into the deep well of our own unconscious. We have got to move from the unconscious. We've got to stir out of this mysterious cave in which, like Thaphna, we have been sleeping. We have got to accept the challenge of internal change, the correction of a problem through the attainment of an insight which is superior to that problem. Because a problem only exists because our knowledge is inferior to our need. The platitude is not a substitute for knowledge, neither is an affirmation or a suggestion. It can be, however, that out of the union of a suggestion with a fetish, with an emblem or symbol of the divine availability, we may be impelled not to use God merely to get us out of the dilemma, but rather to become aware of the experience of the God consciousness in ourselves. If we are able to make this progressive step through faith or through profound believing, we may then be able to pass constructively into a non-critical state. A non-critical condition which is not merely negative, but one which is open or receptive to the experience of a better life. Suggestion, then, is only valuable to the degree that it can impel us toward experience. We cannot cure ignorance with hypnosis, but we can sometimes stimulate in the individual the desire to become learned. But this means he must then go out and learn. Suggestion cannot save the individual from the problems towards which he usually will direct suggestion. But it can perhaps inspire him or recommend to him that he learns to grow, and in that way finds the answer to all problems. For this reason, we should be very wise, very careful in the decision of suggestion or autosuggestion. For it must always be a suggestion to become better, not merely a suggestion to evade or avoid, or a suggestion which might bring us something we do not feel like earning. All suggestion that is appropriate and proper is that which impels us to the adventure of the unfoldment of our own consciousness as the final solution to every problem that stems from ignorance. And all problems stem from ignorance. No problem rises from wisdom itself. And our search for the spiritual integrity to overcome the ignorance in ourselves is perhaps the one great prayer that should be with us constantly, and therefore that we should suggest to ourselves that day by day, in every way, we are more eager to grow. And that, wonderfully enough, will also take care of most of the aches and pains, because most of them arise simply from the individual in the presence of the invitation to grow and lacking the ability or the inclination to accept the invitation. So if we do not know what to do, hold that rabbit's foot tight. Close your eyes and dive into an experience, learning from it all that you can. Seek not to avoid or evade, but rather to overcome all uncertainty by the certainty of personal awareness through experience of the values and principles governing human life. Take care of this properly, I think you'll do fairly well. And our time is up, so we'll start again next week.